here, but I'm blessed. Didn't know it'd take me past my destiny. You're behind me with the rest, 'cause I'm a mess. No more you.
First up, before we start, I just want to say that the original jumpsuit design is by a brand called Krishni, and I'm going to be linking the main jumpsuit that they designed in the description box for anyone who wants to check out this piece. But for this project, you're going to need the following measurements, which I have here on the screen. I recommend you work with your measurements or that of your client for the best outcome. So once you have all your measurements ready, I'm going to go ahead and start by creating the sewing patterns for this design. I'm just starting off by drawing a long vertical line here. This is going to become my center front line, and along this line I'm marking the distance from my shoulder down to my bust point. I'm working with my own measurement here, and then from my bust point I'm marking the vertical distance from there to my waistline, and then the distance from my waistline vertically to my hip line. Now once we have those points marked in place, I'm just going in here to square across my shoulder point, my bust line, my waistline, and my hip line. The next thing I'm going to be doing is to be marking a quarter of my bust measurement along the bust line like so, and then I'm going to be marking a quarter of my hip line or my hip measurement along the hip line on the pattern. Because it's sort of an A-line silhouette, I'm just going to ensure that the waist is comfy enough for my waist measurement before going ahead to draw in the side seam connecting the bust and the hip line. Next up, I'm just going in here to mark 2.5 inches below the shoulder and then 3 inches inwards like so. And I'm going to draw in the neckline. So the neckline is about half an inch from our 2.5 inch point and goes across that 3 inch that we marked. Next, along the side, I'm marking 2 inches above the bust line, and I'm going to be connecting our 3-inch neckline point to that side seam like so. So now that we have the neckline of the design in place, I'm just going in here to mark my crouch depth from my waist. And once I have that marked across, I'm going to be drawing and extending my center front line and then squaring it across so I can draw in my crouch line and the legs of the jumpsuit. Now I'm going in to mark 2.5 inches beyond the center front line along that crouch depth that we drew, and I'm connecting that back to my hip line along the front. Now the trouser of the jumpsuit is up to you to decide. I worked with about 34 inches because I wanted it really nice and long, and I'm just going in here to extend the side seam to the hemline. So I'm going in here to draw in the inner leg of the trouser and also extend that part downwards so we have the inner seam for the trouser of the jumpsuit. So I'm just going in here to draw the hemline of the trouser connecting the inner and the outer leg so we have the full front plan of the jumpsuit in place. Now you can see the legs are really wide, but I want an even exaggerated palazzo fit around the legs, so I'm going to be applying my slash and spread method. So from the neckline I am drawing in a line that goes across the jumpsuit and another one in there like so, and this goes from the neckline all the way down to the hemline. It doesn't really have to be evenly spaced. This is just going to allow you to add volume to the jumpsuit through the middle. So I'm just going in here to cut out the pattern and then slash along the lines that we drew earlier on, and these are the panels I ended up with. I have panel 1, 2, and 3. You can have even more panels, it's really up to you. Just ensure that you space all the panels evenly. So along the neckline I spaced my panels by about half an inch, and I'm just going there to add some tape with some paper underneath. And then along the waistline I spaced it out by about 2.5 inches. And then along the hip line, I spaced out the panels by about 5 inches. So you would essentially need to just add tape to hold the panels onto the pattern paper underneath, and repeat the same thing for the last panel towards the side. So these are all of the panels spaced out across. I'm just going to go ahead and connect the panels along the bottom. Since we've separated them, we need to have a hemline that connects panel 1, 2, and 3. So I'm just going to grab my pattern master and draw in the hemline. It's sort of straight along the sides, and then for the middle area I curved it in so it has like a roundish effect along the hemline of the trousers of the jumpsuit. So once I'd done that, I went ahead to add seam allowance all the way around, 1 centimeter along the sides, the neckline, and then I added about 2 centimeters along the hemline, so that allows me to fold and sew the hems of the jumpsuit. So this is what the front plan of the jumpsuit looks like. Once you are happy with that, you can go ahead and cut out your front pattern, add any annotations, how many pieces you need to cut, so you know what you are working with this pattern. So once you have your front done, you know you can go ahead and create the back jumpsuit patterns. Thankfully, the shape is relatively the same. The back just has some differences along the neckline and along the sides. So I've gone ahead to put some paper on top of our front, and I'm going to trace off the back, and the back crouch is extended by about 2.5 inches that I am connecting back to the crouch line and connecting it down to the inner leg of the trouser. As you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and trace off the other sides, but for the back neckline I am going to be dropping it by 3 inches below the waistline. And this is going to really create that low back effect that this jumpsuit has. And I'm connecting it to the side, so we're able to join the back to the front. And then what I did for the center back was I essentially just curved it in like so it sits nice and snugly along that back. I went ahead to add my seam allowance, trace off the sides, the hem, any other notches I need to keep in mind, and I'm just going in here to cut out the back patterns for the jumpsuit. So these are all of the patterns that you'll be needing. You have your front, your back, as well as a collar piece that is going to allow you to fasten along the neck. Now the collar pattern itself is essentially just a long rectangle that measures about 34 inches long and 5 inches wide, and you need to cut it on the fold so it's long enough to tie around your neck, and like if you want to create a bow detail you can do that as well. The material that I use is this fuchsia pink satin fabric. Thankfully it's not very transparent, so I know I would not need to line the fabric. I ended up using about 3 meters give or take. I also grabbed some complimentary invisible zip to put on the center back, as well as some bias tape to help me finish the arm curve of this jumpsuit. So these are the materials I'm going to be using, and I'm just going to go ahead and pin down my pattern on my fabric. I'm just going to go in and cut the front panels for the jumpsuit, the back panels, as well as the collar piece. These are all of the pieces that I ended up cutting for the jumpsuit. I cut a pair each for the front and the back, and I also cut the collar piece along the fold, as you can see here. Once you have all of your pieces ready to go, the first thing you will need to do is to overlock around your main jumpsuit pieces. So I'm just overlocking along the sides, along the inner leg, and along the center front and the center backs. Once you just do this, whether you're overlocking or using bias tape or whatever method of fastening, you know you don't have to think about finishing up the inside of the jumpsuit. So I'm just gonna head to pin together the center front seams like so, and as you can see, just having that overlock or finishing done just removes the headache of going back in to do this after sewing. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to be sewing the center front together, so I have one piece for the front of the jumpsuit, and I'm just sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance from the beginning up until the end, and then I'm going to do a similar thing for the back. Now for the back pieces, you only want to join towards the end of the crouch line and leave the top end open for the zip. Now, once I have that joined and pressed open in place, I'm going to grab my zip and I'm going to be pinning that into the open end of the center back. I'll say 15 inches is a good place to start because you want to be able to open the zip to the point that you can comfortably get into the jumpsuit. So I'm just going to stitch the invisible zip into the center back seam of the jumpsuit using my invisible zip footer. I have a dedicated tutorial where I shared how to do this and the best ways to get it done. So once you are done fixing the zip, this is what the back of the jumpsuit should look like. We know we're ready to join the front to the back. So I'm just going in here to put right sides together of the front and the back of the jumpsuit, and I'm going to pin along the sides and along the inner leg of the jumpsuit in place. I always like to put pins down before I sew, especially if it's a big piece and I don't want things to move around as I transport the piece to the sewing area. So I'm going to be sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, joining my front to my back. And thankfully, because I already have those edges overlocked, I don't have to think about finishing it afterwards. So next up, I'm going to be sewing with the longest stitch along the back neckline and the front neckline as well. And then when I'm done doing that, I'm going to pull the thread to create gathers along that back neckline, especially because you know we slashed and we spread this pattern. You've added a lot of volume into the piece, so you want to remove that, especially along that back neckline, so it sits snugly on your lower back. So once we've done that for the left and the right hand side, I'm also going to do a little bit of gathering on the front neckline. After doing the gathering, I'm going to go in with the bias tape along that arm curve edge like so, and the bias tape is going to help me finish those points. So I pinned it for the left and for the right hand side, and I'm going to be sewing on this edge like this first, and after stitching along this side, I'm going to go back in and fold the bias tape twice on the wrong side of the garment and literally just top stitch it in such a way that I hide the seam, I hide the raw edge, and we have a nicely finished edge along this front arm curve and back neckline of the jumpsuit. You would need to do this for the left and for the right hand side so you have that part of the garment finished nicely. So once it's done, this is what it should look like. I recommend trying it on at this point so you are happy with the fit, and if you want to make any changes, you have the freedom to do so as well. And once you are happy with that, we can go ahead to work on attaching the collar to the neckline of this jumpsuit. Now the collar is essentially a rectangle, and I've put right sides together. I've just pinned it in place, and I'm going to be sewing from the left to the right hand side, leaving about 6 inches open in the middle, and that is where we're going to be attaching our front neckline to. So after stitching it in place, I went ahead to turn it inside out and leaving my 6-inch pocket for my front neckline. I'm going to be pinning this into the front of the garment like so, just like how we stitched on the bias tape. So you first sew along this point like this, where you join the collar to the neckline of the garment on only one side, and after stitching it like that, you would essentially go back in and use the other side of the collar to conceal the seam and the raw edge, and you just top stitch this side on the right side of the garment. Top stitch it carefully to hide any seams that you don't want to see, and that would just finish off the neckline really nicely. The last thing I did was I essentially just folded and stitched the hemline of the jumpsuit. I did this for the left and for the right hand side, gave my garment a nice press, and this is the final outcome. Can I just say this has to be the most comfortable jumpsuit I have made. I can wear this all day. You just tie it around the neck, zip it up the back, you can lounge in this, or you could wear it on holiday like I have styled it in this photo shoot. But if you guys enjoyed watching this video, do let me know in the comment section down below. Give it a thumbs up, and if you recreate this piece, make sure to tag me on Instagram at KimDaveDesigns. And until my next video, have a good morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are. Bye.
your car.